The next step is to align the two shafts. Here I've jumped ahead to put the motor on, and of course in putting the motor on, refer back to lap 1, where you had the motor mount, all the rules, plus soft foot, plus level the motor. You should ordinarily check end float, pulling in and out, and also run out. In the case of the lab, by now you've probably discovered end float and run out usually is pretty good shape. The big things to check is soft footing, and also predominantly the leveling. Once you have this leveled and this leveled, at least vertically they should be pretty much in alignment. The only alignment next is horizontal. And of course, to put the center of the shaft, motor shaft to the center of this shaft, everything in line would be ideal. Now I'm going to add a step here that's not in your textbook, but it's a consideration. Your textbook assumed that these two shafts are exactly the same diameter. It's a reasonable diameter, 5/8 shaft, 5/8 shaft should be aligned. But just for practice, there will be times you have two different shaft sizes. When you have two different shaft sizes, it's not enough to line them up the top, because you can see if I line up the top, there's quite a gap on the bottom. And if I line up the bottom, there's quite a gap on top. In fact, what we really want is concentric, where the shafts line up. And as you can see, they're lining up here in the picture. And there's a gap all the way around. What we want is that gap to be, ideally, these two centers of these two shafts will line up when the gap is completely equal. Top, bottom, my left, your right, my right, your left. If those are all equal, then they are concentric and they line up perfectly. And we'll get perfect alignment of shaft, which means perfect transfer of torque from one shaft to the other. When they're misaligned, we'll always spend some of the torque on the motor turning against the side loading that will be on the shafts. That's why we go ahead and go through this. So one of the things we do here is we know this is a 0.624 inch shaft. We'll measure the motor shaft to verify that it too is very close to that. Now I have my caliper, and I go ahead and put the caliper around the shaft and verify that my reading, turn this back up so the camera can see this, comes out at 0.621, actually 622. So this is a 0.622 versus a 0.624. Given that this is a slightly narrower shaft by 0.02 of an inch, 624, that means I actually want to be 1/1000th of an inch off in the height and the bottom and left and right sides, so that they're perfectly concentric and in line. So it's a 1/1000th offset that you ordinarily wouldn't have caught if you just assumed these are both 5/8 shafts. The next step in alignment is now to use your, as the textbook suggested, move this shaft against this shaft, put a straight edge down, and use a feeler gauge, collecting a series of sheaths, and attempt to slide them underneath the shaft. Here I'm just able to do that. And if I add up that stack, it's 0.015, 0.002, 0.004, 0.005, 0.06, and 0.007. That adds up to a 0.039 inch. Alternatively, as opposed to straight edge, when you put them together, you could have also used a caliper, end sticking out, a caliper with the end sticking out, a line up, press down, and what we pull up with, again, doing this over again, press down, is we see a difference on the dial of 0.039 inches. You get a reading the same way. Doing this usually is probably a little easier to push down to cover it, because we don't have to worry about the feeler gauge exactly, and you normally would have dial calipers all over the place. That means we have to shim all 4 bolts on the motor mount, each with, get this, 0.038 inches. Why 0.038 rather than 0.039? Is because I already confirmed I want this to be 0.001 higher than this, because that will mean this bottom is 0.001 lower than this shaft. Keep in mind, these are 0.02 of an inch difference in height, in diameter. So I spread that difference between the top and the bottom. So one shim's a 0.038 on the motor. So I go ahead and do that. Then I will have the motor in line with the shaft as far as vertically, both level, ready to go for the Lovejoys. And the only thing left to do is to move the motor to align the motor horizontally. Horizontal means like this or like that, instead of where it wants to be, which is directly in line. And that'll be our next step. And of course, we'll add to that the Lovejoys.